Right now, somewhere in the Kalahari Desert, the sun has just dropped below the horizon and a fire is being built. Because without that fire, the night belongs to everything else. For 300,000 years, every human being who ever lived understood this in their bones. The darkness was not romantic. It was not peaceful. It was the edge of a world your eyes couldn't handle. And so they gathered around flame every single night, for hundreds of thousands of years, and they did something inside that circle of light that may have changed what it means to be human. So what did they actually do for all those hours? The answer is more specific than you'd think, and it changes the way you understand nearly everything. Start with the fire itself. The earliest solid evidence of humans controlling fire comes from Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, roughly 1 million years ago, though our relationship with flame almost certainly stretches back further than the evidence can currently confirm. A campfire creates a circle of safety roughly 30 feet in diameter. Inside that circle, predators won't approach. This isn't a metaphor. Anthropologists who have lived with modern hunter-gatherer groups document that people who wander away from the fire at night face significantly higher risk of predator attack, even in the present day. Before fire, when the sun set, your ancestors did exactly what every other primate did. Fire didn't just warm them, it gave them the night, and the first thing they did with that night was talk. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences after spending years recording and cataloguing conversations among the Jew/Hoansi Bushmen of the Kalahari, one of the last groups on Earth still living close to the original human pattern. What she found was striking. During daylight hours, roughly 80% of all conversations were practical in nature. Who was hunting where? Which plants had come in? Logistics, economic negotiations. Daytime talk was essentially work. But at night, around the fire, the character of conversation shifted almost completely. At night, 81% of conversations were stories, not gossip in the trivial sense, full narratives, people in distant places doing difficult things, explanations of where the world came from. Wiesner argued that this is where human culture was actually born, not in the daylight hours of practical coordination, but in the firelit hours where the mind could reach past the immediate and imagine things that didn't exist yet. The campfire was the original theatre, the original classroom, the place where a hunter who had tracked a wounded kudu for 9 miles could describe every step of it to people who weren't there, and those people could feel it, fear it, want to know how it ended. No other species does this. Chimpanzees don't gather in the evening and recount the events of the day to each other. Humans do. And for 300,000 years, they did it by firelight, with the dark pressing in from every direction and the stars overhead in a sky no artificial light had ever touched. But here's what's fascinating. The stories weren't only entertainment, they were the legal system. Among the Kung Bushmen, the way a man who had taken more than his share got handled wasn't through formal punishment. It was through talk, stories. Wiesner found that firelight conversations carried an enormous amount of what she called social and political content, things that couldn't easily be said during the day, but could be worked through at night, in story form, with the whole camp present and listening. Reputation, memory, obligation, the knowledge of who had stepped up and who had quietly disappeared when something hard needed doing. The fire was where all of that got sorted. Children were part of it. In traditional hunter-gatherer camps, children didn't get sent to bed early while the adults stayed up. They sat in the circle too. They fell asleep listening. Anthropologist David Lancy, who has studied dozens of traditional communities across cultures, found that children in these societies learned almost entirely through observation and participation, not through formal instruction. A child who heard the same story, told 10 different ways over 5 years of evenings by the fire, understood something about narrative structure, cause and effect, and the social world of the camp that no explicit lesson could have produced. The fire circle was the school, and attendance wasn't optional. And then, Sometime around the middle of the night, people slept. In 2001, historian Roger Ekirch published a paper that reshaped what researchers thought they knew about human sleep. He had spent 16 years working through historical records, and he found over 500 references, spanning centuries, that all pointed to the same pattern. Prayer books from the 1400s, court documents, medical texts, personal diaries, passages in Homer. Every single one of them mentioned first sleep and second sleep as distinct and separate things. Before the industrial age, people went to sleep shortly after dark, slept for roughly 4 hours, woke up for 1 to 2 hours in the middle of the night, and then slept again until dawn. This was not a disorder. This was just how humans slept. The single unbroken block of 8 hours that modern people chase anxiously every night was, for most of human history, not the pattern at all. What happened during that waking window in the middle of the night is where it gets genuinely strange. A French physician writing in the 16th century recommended that couples conceive children during this period because they were better rested and more present than at any other time. People visited neighbors. They reflected on their dreams while they were still clear. They lay in the dark and simply thought. In 1992, psychiatrist Thomas Wehr at the National Institute of Mental Health ran an experiment in which volunteers were placed in 14 hours of darkness each night for a month, approximating what your ancestors would have experienced before artificial light extended the evening. Within weeks, every single participant settled independently into the same two-phase pattern. 4 hours of sleep, 1 to 3 hours of quiet wakefulness, then 4 more hours until dawn. Nobody instructed them. Nobody suggested it. Their bodies simply remembered. Wehr measured their hormone levels during the wakeful period and found something that stopped researchers cold. The participants weren't in an ordinary waking state. Their brains were producing elevated levels of prolactin, the same hormone present during deep meditation and in the period after orgasm. They described a quality of calm that most of them said they hadn't felt during normal daytime waking hours. Reflective, unhurried, almost outside of time. It wasn't insomnia. It was its own distinct state of consciousness, one that existed inside every human nervous system and simply hadn't been triggered in centuries because the dark that triggered it had been removed. The fire that once ended the evening and let the darkness close in completely had been replaced, first by cheaper candles in the 1600s, then by gas lamps in the 1800s, then by Thomas Edison's electric bulb in 1879, and within a single generation, the night your ancestors had known for 300,000 years was effectively gone. Your body still has that program running. When artificial light hits your retina at 11 p.m., your brain reads it as daytime and delays the release of melatonin, the hormone that cues the first phase of sleep. Researchers have found that just 1 week of camping with no artificial light resets melatonin cycles by nearly 2 hours, shifting production back towards sunset rather than hours after it. That's all it takes for the old pattern to begin reasserting itself. What your ancestors did by firelight every night for 300,000 years wasn't just survival. It was the building of everything that would eventually become civilization. Story, memory, law, shared identity. A reflective middle-of-the-night silence that produced a state of consciousness most people alive today have never once experienced. They sat in a 30-foot circle of orange light, in absolute darkness beyond it, and they were, by most measures, completely absorbed in being human together.